Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're going to look back at an industrial disaster that happened 40 years ago, and we're going to ask a really important question. Why does it matter more today than ever before?
So let's kick things off with a big question, one that really gets to the heart of the matter. What's the real cost of progress? You know, this constant push and pull between industrial growth and the potential for absolute catastrophe, a dilemma that, tragically, the Bhopal Gas Tragedy captures perfectly. All right, to really get a grip on its legacy, why we're still talking about it, we've got to go back in time. We're going to the night of December 2nd, 1984, in Bhopal, India.
Okay, so picture this. It's just after midnight. At a pesticide plant, run by Union Carbide, a chemical reaction starts to spiral completely out of control. The result? A thick, heavy cloud of deadly gas, methyl isocyanate, begins to leak out, and it just silently creeps across the sleeping city.
And the sheer scale of this leak, it's just hard to wrap your head around. We're talking about 40 metric tons of this lethal gas being released into the air. 40 tons. This stuff is incredibly toxic to people, and it's a key ingredient for making pesticides.
And the human cost? Well, it was absolutely staggering. You know, the first reports were bad, but they didn't capture the full picture. It's the long-term studies, the ones that track disease over decades, that give us the real numbers. They estimate that, over time, this disaster caused somewhere between 15,000 and 25,000 deaths. Just an unbelievable toll.
But the reach of the disaster was, well, it was terrifying. More than 500,000 people. Think about that. Over 500,000 men, women, and children were exposed as that toxic cloud just blanketed the city.
The immediate impact was a nightmare. I mean, people woke up choking, literally unable to breathe, their eyes and lungs feeling like they were on fire. Thousands died right there, within just a few hours. And the local hospitals? They were completely swamped. Even worse, the doctors had no clue what chemical they were dealing with, so they didn't even know how to treat people.
So here's what's absolutely crucial to understand. This was not some random freak accident. This wasn't just one broken valve. No. This was the result of a whole system of failures, a cascade of problems that were, and this is the key part, entirely preventable.
And when you look at the chain of events, it's just a masterclass in negligence. Management was cutting costs, right? So what did they do? They shut down key safety systems. The refrigeration unit that was supposed to keep the chemical stable turned off. The safety scrubbers and the flare tower meant to burn off any leaks? Nope, not working. On top of that, they cut staff and training, running the place with a skeleton crew. And maybe worst of all, their own engineers were sounding the alarm, raising red flags, and they were just ignored, time and time again.
You know, this event is a perfect, almost textbook example of something called a normal accident. It's a theory from a sociologist named Charles Perrow. And the basic idea is that when you have really complex, tightly connected systems, think nuclear power plants like Chernobyl or even the Space Shuttle Challenger, you don't need one huge thing to go wrong. All it takes is a few small, almost predictable little failures to line up in just the wrong way, and boom, you get a total catastrophe.
But here's the thing. The disaster didn't stop when the gas cloud finally dissipated. In a lot of ways, that was just Act 1. The end of the initial horror was really just the beginning of a second disaster, a much slower, more insidious one that would play out over the next several decades.
So, what about the response? The legal fallout? Well, it was painfully slow, and frankly, most people saw it as a joke. It took 5 whole years just to get a settlement. And get this, decades later, the only people who faced any real criminal charges were a few low-level managers. The top brass, the people making the big decisions, they were basically untouchable.
And that settlement, the $470 million, it was blasted by critics, and for good reason. What it did, essentially, was put a price tag on unimaginable human suffering. We're talking about lifelong illnesses, disabilities, health problems that were passed down to the next generation, and it was all boiled down to a single check. For the company, it meant they could close the books on it. But for the victims, it was anything but justice.
And if that's not bad enough, the factory site itself became a ticking time bomb. It was just abandoned, never properly cleaned up. So for decades, all that hazardous waste just sat there, slowly seeping into the groundwater, poisoning the local water supply. It completely blurred the line, you know? The disaster wasn't something that happened in the past. It became a constant present-day threat.
Okay, so let's zoom out. Why are we, all over the world, still talking about something that happened 40 years ago in India? because the shock waves from Bhopal were huge. They sent ripples through so many different fields, creating these profound, lasting lessons that literally changed how we do things.
Bhopal really became this major turning point for so many areas. Take law, for instance. It showed that just trusting companies to regulate themselves with voluntary codes doesn't work. In science, it was a wake-up call to start studying disasters in a more connected way. For engineers, it became the ultimate case study in ethics. Your job is to prioritize safety, period. And for economists, it was a brutal lesson that the hidden, long-term costs of a disaster like this can totally wipe out any money a factory ever made. The disaster also shined a huge spotlight on this idea of environmental justice. Think about where the plant was built, right next to these shanty towns, these informal neighborhoods where low-income families lived. These were the people with the least political power, the ones who couldn't fight back against having a dangerous chemical plant for a neighbor. They shouldered all of the risk and got none of the benefits.
And then there's this fascinating and infuriating concept called undone science. Union Carbide refused to share the exact chemical cocktail that was in the gas. By keeping that information secret, they did two things. First, they made it impossible for doctors to give the right treatment. And second, they made it incredibly difficult for victims to prove in court that their health problems were directly caused by the leak. It was a strategy, really, to limit their own accountability.
And all of this brings us to the final, and maybe the most important takeaway. Bhopal isn't just a sad story in a history book. It's not over. It's an active, ongoing tragedy.
As one expert put it so well, this wasn't some kind of anomaly. It was a structural failure. A failure of how we govern risk, a failure of ethics, a failure of corporate responsibility. And the scary part is, a failure like that could absolutely happen again anywhere, under the right or, I guess, the wrong conditions. Yeah, there's just no neat ending to this story. It refuses to be closed. Survivors are still fighting for decent health care. The ground is still poisoned. People are still arguing about who's ultimately to blame. What it's become is a kind of negative blueprint, a terrible warning of what happens when you have powerful technology without any real accountability.
So that leaves us with one last, really challenging thought. It's been 4 decades. We know exactly what went wrong in Bhopal. We know how it could have been prevented. So the question we really have to ask ourselves, all of us, is this. Are the systems we have in place today, all around the world, are they actually strong enough to stop the next Bhopal from happening?